They spent 25 years looking at me like I was a stain on the family portrait. My mother's favorite weapon wasn't a hand, it was a word. She called me the affair child before I even knew what the word meant. But yesterday, a tiny plastic tube and a drop of saliva turned my entire world upside down. It turns out I wasn't the one with the secret. They were. My name is Lily Rose, and for as long as I can remember, I lived in the shadow of a lie. Growing up in a house that feels like a courtroom is exhausting. Imagine every dinner, every holiday, and every birthday being shadowed by a silent accusation. My mother, Sarah, didn't do subtle. She looked at my dark curls and my green eyes, features neither she nor my father David possessed, and she saw a betrayal. She made sure I felt it too. "You're lucky your father is a saint, Lily Rose," she'd hiss whenever I reached for a second helping of food, or asked for a new pair of shoes. Most men wouldn't raise another man's mistake. David, the man I called Dad, was a quiet person. He never joined in on the verbal abuse, but his silence was just as loud. He'd look at me with this profound, aching sadness, as if looking at me reminded him of the worst day of his life. I spent 2 decades trying to be perfect. I got the best grades, I never broke a rule, and I stayed out of the way. I thought if I was good enough, they'd forgive me for existing. But you can't earn forgiveness for a crime you didn't commit. The breaking point came during my 25th birthday dinner. It was supposed to be a small celebration, just the 3 of us. I had just finished my master's degree, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet. "I'm thinking of moving to the city for that junior analyst position," I mentioned, trying to keep the conversation light. My mother set her fork down with a sharp clink against the china. "Of course, running away just like your real father probably did. You always had that restless, dishonest streak in you." The table went cold. I looked at David, hoping, praying he would finally say something. He just stared at his plate, tracing the pattern on the rim. "Mom, why do you do this?" My voice trembled. "Why can't you just love me?" She laughed, and it was the coldest sound I've ever heard. "Love a constant reminder of my husband's humiliation? You're lucky you have a roof over your head, Lily Rose. Don't push your luck." I left the table without another word. That night, I didn't cry. I went online and ordered a DNA kit. I didn't do it because I wanted to find a secret father. I did it because I wanted to know who I was. I wanted to see the face of the man they hated so much. 3 weeks later, the notification popped up on my phone while I was at work. My heart was hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might break. I slipped into the break room, my fingers shaking as I logged into the portal. I expected to see a stranger's name. I expected to see a list of cousins I'd never met. But when the results loaded, my breath hitched. My paternal match wasn't a stranger. It was David, 99.9% match. The man who had spent 25 years mourning a betrayal that never happened was my biological father. And the woman who had spent 25 years calling me an affair child was either delusional or she was hiding something much darker than a secret fling. I sat there in that sterile break room, staring at the screen, until the numbers blurred. All those years of being treated like a mistake, all those nights crying myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't pure enough for this family. It was all based on a lie that my mother had manufactured. I knew right then that the quiet, submissive Lily Rose was dead. I headed straight to my car. I didn't call, I didn't text. I drove to their house with the results pulled up on my phone like a loaded gun. When I walked through the front door, they were in the living room, watching the news. "Just a normal, happy couple. We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been. My mother looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Don't start with the drama, Lily Rose. We already told you." "Shut up, Mom," I snapped. The room went silent. Even David looked shocked. I walked over and thrust my phone in front of his face. "Look at it, Dad. Look at the data." David took the phone from my hand. His glasses were perched on the tip of his nose, and for a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I watched them widen, then squint, then fill with a confusion so deep it looked like physical pain. "Lily, this says..." His voice trailed off, cracking at the end. "It says you're my father, Dad. My biological father," I said. my voice ringing out clearly. There was no affair. There was no other man. You are the only father I have, and I am the only daughter you've ever had. He looked up at me, and for the first time in 25 years, he didn't look through me with sadness. He looked at me. Really looked at me. His eyes moved over my face, searching for himself in my features, and I realized he was seeing the truth for the first time. My mother stood up so fast, her chair almost tipped over. Her face wasn't pale. It was a blotchy, angry red. That's a lie. Those tests are scams, Lily Rose. You probably faked that screen just to hurt us, to cause trouble like you always do. I didn't fake a thing, Mom. I turned to her, feeling a cold fire in my chest. Why are you so angry? You should be happy. Your husband wasn't cheated on. Your daughter isn't a mistake. You already knew this. She lunged for the phone, but David pulled it back, holding it out of her reach. He stood up slowly, looking like a man waking up from a 20-year coma. He looked at Sarah, his wife of nearly 3 decades, and I saw a flicker of something new in his expression. Suspicion. Sarah, David said quietly, his voice dangerously low. Why have you spent 25 years telling me she wasn't mine? You told me you had proof. You told me you confessed because you couldn't live with the guilt. My jaw dropped. She had confessed? To a lie? I was confused, David. It was a dark time, she stammered, her bravado starting to crumble at the edges. The dates didn't line up, and she looked nothing like us. I thought I was being honest. Honest? I stepped forward. You called me a mistake at my graduation. You told me I was a burden on this family at my birthday dinner. You watched me grow up thinking I was a product of shame, while you knew, deep down, that Dad was the father. Why? Why would a mother do that to her own child? The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother looked trapped, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit, but there was nowhere to hide from the cold, hard data on that screen. I did it for us, she suddenly shrieked, the mask finally slipping completely. You were always so difficult, Lily, even as a baby. And David was pulling away back then. He was focused on work. He was distant. When I told him I'd stepped out, he stayed. He felt sorry for me. He felt he had to protect us. It kept him here. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. She had used me as a leash. She had fabricated a betrayal to guilt-trip a man into staying in a marriage he was checked out of. She sacrificed my childhood, my self-esteem, and my relationship with my father just to ensure she didn't lose her perfect life. David let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. He threw the phone onto the sofa and walked toward the door. David, wait, Sarah cried out, reaching for his arm. He shook her off like she was something poisonous. 25 years, Sarah. I spent 25 years grieving a marriage that wasn't even broken and hating myself for not being able to love my own daughter properly. You are a monster. He slammed the door, leaving me alone with the woman who had spent my entire life trying to break me. She turned her gaze toward me, and the look in her eyes wasn't one of regret. It was pure, unadulterated venom. I hope you're happy, she hissed. You finally destroyed this family. No, I said, picking up my phone and heading for the door. I didn't destroy it. I just finally turned the lights on. And by the way, Mom, don't bother calling me. From now on, you're the one who doesn't belong. I walked out into the night air, breathing deeply for the first time in my life. But as I sat in my car, watching the lights in the house flicker, a thought occurred to me. If Dad was my father, then why did my mother look so terrified of the DNA test? Why was she so desperate to keep the affair narrative alive? There was something else in those results, something I hadn't looked at yet. I opened the app again and scrolled down to the ethnic breakdown and genetic health sections. My breath caught in my throat. There, in black and white, was a detail that changed everything. Again. I sat in the darkness of my car, the glow of the phone screen reflecting in my eyes. I had scrolled past the paternity match, past the percentages, down into the raw genetic data. My mother's panic hadn't just been about a fake affair. It was about what that affair was supposed to cover up. As I looked at my genetic markers, something was missing, or rather, something was present that shouldn't have been. I looked at my maternal match. The screen didn't say Sarah Rose, 99.9%. It said, no match found. My blood turned to ice. I refreshed the page. I logged out and logged back in, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The results remained the same. David was my biological father, but Sarah, the woman who had spent 25 years tormenting me, the woman who claimed she had birthed me in a moment of shame, she wasn't my mother. I wasn't an affair child. I was a stolen child. The pieces began to click together like a horrifying puzzle. My mother, or Sarah, I couldn't call her mom anymore, was never the victim. She was the architect. I remembered the few photos I'd seen of her pregnancy. She was always wearing bulky sweaters, always standing behind a table or a chair. There were no hospital photos, no stories of labor, just a sudden arrival. I didn't go back into the house. I couldn't. I drove to a nearby motel, checked into a room, and spent the night staring at the ceiling. My entire identity had been a lie, but the lie went deeper than I ever imagined. If Sarah wasn't my mother, then who was? And did David know? The next morning I called David. He answered on the first ring, his voice sounding hollow and aged. He was staying at his brother's place. "Dad," I said, the word feeling heavy in my mouth. "I need you to meet me, and I need you to bring your old journals, anything from the year I was born." We met at a quiet park. He looked like he hadn't slept a second. I didn't ease into it. I watched his face go from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. "She told me she gave birth at home," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the no-match text. "She said she was scared of hospitals, that she wanted it to be private because of what she told me about the affair." I was so caught up in the pain of the betrayal that I didn't question it. I just wanted to support her. "Dad, think back," I urged, leaning across the picnic table. "Where did I come from?" He buried his face in his hands. "There was a girl, a young woman named Elena. She worked at the library where your mother spent all her time. She was pregnant, and she was alone. Sarah told me she was helping her, bringing her clothes and food. And then one day, Sarah told me Elena moved away, and a week later, Sarah said she went into labor. The horror of it was starting to take shape. I looked at the close matches list on the DNA site again. I hadn't looked at the potential cousins section yet. I scrolled down, and there it was. A match for a woman named Maria Silva, listed as a first cousin. I clicked on Maria's profile. She had a public photo. She had my curls, she had my green eyes, and she had a memorial post on her page from 3 years ago. "Missing you every day, Elena. We never stopped looking for you." I showed the screen to David. He let out a broken, choked-off sob. "I didn't know, Lily. I swear to God, I thought you were the result of her mistake. I didn't know I was living with a kidnapper. But the DNA said David was my father. If he was my father, and Elena was my mother, then the affair wasn't Sarah's. It was his." But looking at his genuine shock, I realized he didn't even know he'd had an affair. The web Sarah had spun wasn't just a leash to keep a husband. It was a cage built on a foundation of a crime I was only beginning to understand. Sarah hadn't just stolen a baby, she had stolen a life, and she had convinced the father that his own child was a mark of shame. "We're going to the police, Dad," I said, standing up. "Not yet," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "She's still at the house. If she knows we know about Elena, she'll run. Or worse, we need to find out what happened to that girl first. Because if you're here and Elena is missing—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We didn't go to the police. Not yet. David was terrified that if Sarah sensed the net closing in, the truth about Elena would vanish forever. We drove back to the house, but we didn't go through the front door. David had a spare key to the detached garage, a place Sarah never stepped foot in because it was too dusty. In the back of the garage, tucked behind stacks of old statistics textbooks and rusted gardening tools, sat a heavy, locked filing cabinet. David fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so much I had to take them from him. "She kept everything in here," David whispered, his breath hitching. "Our marriage certificates, tax returns, medical records. She told me she handled the boring stuff so I could focus on my teaching." I clicked the lock open and pulled the top drawer. It was filled with mundane folders, but the bottom drawer was different. It was packed with envelopes addressed to a Sarah Miller, my mother's maiden name, at a P.O. box I didn't recognize. I pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. Inside was a handwritten journal. I flipped to a page dated 25 years ago, just 2 weeks before my birth. The handwriting was cramped, frantic. Elena is getting suspicious. She keeps asking why David isn't coming to the checkups. I told her he's working late, but she wants to call him. I can't let her call him. If he finds out I told her he wanted to be a silent donor for her baby, the whole thing falls apart. He thinks she's just a friend. She thinks he's the father who doesn't want her, but wants the child. I am the bridge. Without me, they are nothing. I looked at David. He looked like he'd been struck. A silent donor? She told this girl I agreed to father her child, and then abandon her? The manipulation was genius and sickening. Sarah had found a vulnerable, pregnant woman and convinced her that David was the biological father, likely through a stolen sample or a calculated lie, and then convinced David that Elena was just a charity case. She had played both sides, keeping them apart while she prepared to take the prize. I kept reading. The entries got darker. October 14th. The baby is coming. Elena is scared. I told her we'd go to the private clinic in the woods. No records, no trail. Once the baby is here, Elena will move away just like we planned. She thinks I've bought her a bus ticket to start a new life. She has no idea. She has no idea. I repeated the words, a chill settling in my marrow. Dad, where is this clinic in the woods? We don't have a clinic in the woods, David said, his voice trembling. But we used to have an old hunting cabin, my family's property, 3 hours north. Sarah insisted on selling it right after you were born. She said it was too much upkeep. She didn't sell it, Dad. Look, I pulled out a deed from the bottom of the folder. The cabin was still in Sarah's maiden name. She had forged his signature on the sale documents and kept the property for herself. We didn't waste another second. We got into David's truck and drove north. The sun was setting, casting long skeletal shadows across the highway. Neither of us spoke. The weight of what we might find at that cabin sat between us like a physical weight. As we pulled up the overgrown dirt path, the cabin looked like a rotting corpse in the moonlight. The windows were boarded up, and the porch had partially collapsed. David took a crowbar from the truck bed and pried the door open. The air inside was thick with the smell of mold and something metallic. Dust danced in the beam of our flashlights. It was frozen in time. A rusted metal bed frame sat in the corner. On the small wooden table, there was a single, faded baby blanket, pink. Lily, look at the floorboards, David said, his voice barely a breath. Under the bed, the wood was a different color, darker. I knelt down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached out and pushed against one of the boards. It creaked and gave way. Hidden in the hollow space beneath the floor wasn't a body, thank God, but a small, waterproof metal box. I pulled it out and flipped the latch. Inside was Elena's ID, her social security card, and a stack of letters she had written to David, letters he had never received. There was also a final note, written in Sarah's hand, but signed with a shaky, forced version of Elena's signature. I'm leaving the baby with Sarah. I can't do this. Don't look for me. But underneath the letters was the real evidence. A series of photos Sarah had taken. Elena holding me, smiling through tears of exhaustion, minutes after I was born. And then a photo of a check. A massive check paid out to a relocation service that didn't exist. She didn't kill her, I whispered, hope surging through me. She paid her to disappear. She blackmailed her, telling her you'd have her arrested for something if she didn't leave. But then, I saw the very last thing in the box. It was a newspaper clipping, from a town 4 states away, dated 6 months after I was born. Unidentified woman, found in river. Pinned to the clipping was a note in Sarah's handwriting. Problem solved. Permanently. I felt the world tilt. My mother wasn't just a kidnapper and a liar. She was a murderer. And she had raised me in the house she bought with the blood of the woman who actually gave me life. We have to go, David said, his face a mask of cold fury. Now. We turned to leave, but as we reached the door, the headlights of another car swung into the clearing, blinding us. The engine cut out. The car door opened, and a silhouette we both knew too well stepped out into the moonlight. She was holding something long and heavy in her hand. I knew you'd come here eventually. Sarah's voice drifted across the clearing, sweet and poisonous as ever. I always said you were too curious for your own good, Lily Rose. The cold night air felt like needles against my skin as Sarah stepped into the weak glow of the cabin's porch light. In her hand, she wasn't holding a weapon, but something far more terrifying, a heavy canister of gasoline and a flare. She didn't look like the woman who had packed my school lunches or straightened my hair. She looked hollow, her eyes reflecting a desperate, jagged light. "Step away from the cabin, David," she said, her voice eerily calm. "And Lily, give me the box. You were never supposed to find that box." "It's over, Sarah," David shouted, stepping in front of me. "We know everything. We know about Elena. We know what you did in that river town. You can't burn away the truth anymore." Sarah laughed, a jagged broken sound that echoed through the trees. "The truth? The truth is that I gave you a life, David. I gave you a daughter. You were drifting away looking for something real, and I made sure you found it right here at home. So what if she wasn't mine? I made her yours." "You stole her," I screamed, stepping out from behind David, clutching the metal box to my chest. "You stole me from a woman who loved me, and then you spent 25 years making me feel like I was a mistake, so you could keep Dad under your thumb. You didn't give us a life. You gave us a prison." Sarah's face contorted. The perfect mother mask was gone, replaced by a sneer of pure hatred. "You were always the weak link, Lily. So much like her. Always crying. Always needing something. I should have left you at the cabin that night." She unscrewed the cap of the canister and began splashing gasoline onto the dry, rotting wood of the porch. The fumes hit me, thick and choking. "If I can't have this family the way I built it," she hissed, striking the flare, "then no one will." She tossed the flare. The porch ignited in a roar of orange and red. The dry wood went up like tinder. David lunged forward, grabbing Sarah's arm to pull her away from the growing wall of fire. But she fought him with a strength born of pure delusion. They tumbled onto the dirt as the cabin, the place of my birth and Elena's heartbreak, began to scream under the heat. I didn't run. I pulled out my phone. I hadn't just been standing there. I had been recording from the moment she stepped out of the car. Her confession, her threats, the sight of her lighting the fire, it was all there, streaming to a cloud drive she couldn't touch. The sirens began to wail in the distance. David had called them the moment we entered the county. Sarah heard them too. She stopped fighting David and looked toward the road, the flickering flames dancing in her wide, panicked eyes. She realized the web had finally snapped. She turned and ran into the woods, disappearing into the darkness she had lived in for 25 years. They found her 3 hours later, shivering and incoherent, near the edge of the river, the same river where the newspaper clipping said Elena had been found. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The DNA evidence, combined with the recording and the documents in the metal box, was enough to dismantle Sarah's life in days. She was charged with kidnapping, fraud, and eventually, after a cold case team reopened the file from 4 states away, the murder of Elena Silva. David and I sat in a lawyer's office a month later. He looked older, but the heavy sadness in his eyes had been replaced by something else, a quiet, protective resolve. "I'm so sorry, Lily," he said, taking my hand. "I should have seen it. I should have fought for you." "You're fighting for me now, Dad," I replied. "That's what matters." I eventually met Maria Silva, my cousin. Meeting her was like looking into a mirror that finally showed me the truth. She told me stories about Elena, how she loved poetry, how she had a laugh that could light up a room, and how she had been so excited to meet her baby girl. I changed my name. I'm no longer just Lily Rose. I'm Lily Elena Rose. I kept the name David gave me, but I added the piece of me that had been stolen. Sarah is behind bars now, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Sometimes I think about visiting her, just to show her that I'm happy. I want her to see that despite 25 years of being told I was a mistake, I turned out to be her greatest failure. Because in the end, love didn't need a lie to survive. It just needed the truth. I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Let me know your city and the time in the comments. End question. If you found out your entire childhood was built on a lie, would you confront your parents or walk away forever? If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Lily Calm Stories for more deep, emotional journeys.